I, Julia Foster, 32, should have felt content. Michael, my husband of 10 years, was asleep beside me, his breathing steady, predictable. But there was a strange quiet in the house, the kind that whispered warnings. I poured my coffee, absently scrolling through my laptop, checking emails I had no business opening. Then I saw it. A hotel confirmation for Paris. Not a modest city trip, but a full-blown, 10-day, 5-star stay, booked under 2 names, Michael Foster and someone named Sophie L. Sophie L? My chest tightened. That name had floated past me before, buried in passing conversations about old college friends. I'd never thought much of it, until now. At first, I blamed myself. Perhaps I had misread. Perhaps it was some work colleague or a family friend. But the details didn't lie. The flights were business class, $4,200 each, and the hotel, still pending payment, would cost nearly $3,800. Add in Michael's recent shopping sprees, new luggage, designer clothing, over $10,000, disappearing from our joint account without so much as a hint. I sat there, frozen, letting the coffee grow cold. My mind replayed the past months, each small anomaly suddenly crystal clear. Michael's phone face down at dinner, hushed late-night calls, sudden bursts of defensiveness whenever I asked about expenses. How could I have missed it? How had I been blind to the signs? And then the emails. Oh, the emails. I clicked open his account, an impulse I shouldn't have indulged, and my heart sank into a pit of rage and disbelief. Months of correspondence stretched before me, starting innocently enough. LinkedIn messages from Sophie, catching up, reminiscing about college days. But slowly the tone shifted. Flirtatious words, private jokes, hints that only someone close would understand. And then, explicit plans. Plans to finally meet in Paris, alone, uninterrupted. I felt dizzy. Betrayal tasted like bitter coffee in my mouth. I clutched the laptop to my chest, staring blankly at the wall, replaying our life together. The quiet dinners, our shared dreams, the plans for retirement, vacations we had painstakingly planned side by side. He had spent months weaving a lie right under my nose. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately. Another part, a colder, sharper part, began plotting. This wasn't impulsive. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. No, I would take control. I would make sure he couldn't drag me down with him, couldn't spend another dime of our money on his selfish desires. My thoughts turned toward the financial levers I had at my disposal, our joint accounts, the credit cards, everything I technically had equal access to. Michael would never suspect that I, calm and composed, could wield these tools like a scalpel, cutting away his deceit with precision. That afternoon, I watched him from across the kitchen, pretending to sip my tea while he hummed absent-mindedly, packing his work bag. He seemed unaware, so normal, so familiar. Yet I knew the truth now, the hidden undercurrent of his life that had remained invisible to me. And that knowledge was power. I began drafting a plan, silently outlining the steps I would take. First, I would verify the extent of his spending. Then, I would act. Carefully, strategically. Every move measured, every reaction calculated. He had chosen to betray me. Now it was my turn to reclaim control. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with bruised purples and oranges, I felt an icy resolve settle in. Michael had been reckless, selfish, blind to the consequences of his actions. But I would make him understand that betrayal came with a cost. Not just the superficial cost of money, but the deeper price, trust, respect, the illusion of our perfect life. I went to bed that night, knowing the trip would begin soon, that he would board a plane to Paris, oblivious to the trap I was setting. And for the first time in months, I slept without the weight of uncertainty pressing on my chest. Not because I was untroubled, but because I was ready. Ready to reclaim everything that was mine. The first part of the storm had begun. Unseen but inevitable. Michael would wake in Paris, and when he reached for the safety of our funds, he would find them gone. Not stolen, not lost, protected. And that, my heart whispered, was only the beginning. The morning Michael left for work, he kissed me on the cheek without a thought. The usual warmth, the casual familiarity that once made my heart flutter. It felt hollow now, like a mask he wore every day. I watched him drive away, and as the taillights disappeared, I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Because today the balance of power would shift. I called the credit card company first, keeping my voice steady, professional. "I'd like to report suspicious activity on my account," I said, carefully omitting the part that it was my husband who had triggered the alert. "Unusual purchases, large transactions abroad." The representative was polite, efficient. "We can freeze the account immediately. The investigation usually takes 5 to 7 business days." "Perfect." I hung up and leaned back, letting the adrenaline pulse through me. Michael, in Paris, had no idea. Sophie, that smiling, innocent-seeming college friend, had no idea. They had spent months planning, imagining a romantic getaway, all while blind to the fact that every dollar they thought was theirs had been watched, controlled, and ultimately taken from under them. By mid-afternoon, my phone began buzzing. First, a text. "Julia? Why won't the card work? We need it for the hotel." My stomach tightened. I didn't reply. Then came the calls. 1, 2, 3. The number flashing on my screen was familiar, yet unfamiliar. Michael's voice, strained, trembling, desperate. "Julia, what did you do? The card, it's declined. Sophie, the hotel." I sipped my coffee, calm. "Suspicious activity," I said evenly. "I reported it. The company froze the account pending investigation. Standard procedure." A pause. Then, You did this on purpose." I let the silence stretch, tasting the panic in his words. "It seems you've mismanaged your finances," I said softly. "Perhaps Sophie should have helped you budget." The line went silent. I could hear his breathing, rapid, uneven. I imagined him pacing the marble floors of the Paris hotel suite, Sophie's voice trembling beside him, trying to reassure him while he fumbled with unfamiliar emergency procedures. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt, a flicker of compassion, but it was drowned out by satisfaction. After months of deceit, of hidden messages and stolen trust, this was justice, cold, calculated, precise. Over the next few days, the texts and calls kept coming. Every time he tried to reach me, I let it ring. Every email, unanswered. I watched from home as the consequences of his actions unfolded in real time. And yet, I couldn't help but reflect. Michael wasn't just a cheater. He was careless, blind to the ramifications of his actions. Perhaps he had imagined Paris as a brief escape, a fantasy uninterrupted by reality. But reality had a way of catching up, often when you least expected it. On the third day, I received a flurry of frantic messages. Sophie's name appeared repeatedly, sometimes with exclamation points, sometimes pleading, "We'll never make it back. Julia, you have to help us." I stared at the phone, cold amusement twisting in my gut. My hand hovered over the keyboard, tempted to reply, then thought better of it. This was not about petty vengeance. This was about setting boundaries, reclaiming what was mine, and letting the weight of their recklessness fall squarely where it belonged. Late that night, I sat in the darkened living room, laptop open, reviewing the emails and receipts I had secretly collected. Each flirty message from Sophie, each planning note from Michael. It was a mosaic of betrayal. I allowed myself to feel the full scope of it, the heartbreak, the anger, the disappointment. And then I let it go. Focused, clear. Because the next step was crucial. I needed Michael to understand the consequences, not through shouting, not through tears, but through the cold, hard truth. Actions have consequences. I drafted a message to him. "When you return, we will have a discussion about finances, trust, and responsibility. Until then, consider this a pause in access. Protecting what is ours is my only priority." I hit send and leaned back, watching the shadows lengthen across the walls. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane. The storm had begun, but unlike the chaos of Paris unfolding thousands of miles away, this storm was quiet, deliberate, and entirely under my control. And I smiled, because I knew one thing with absolute certainty: betrayal might be Michael's choice, but exposing it and ensuring he faced the consequences was mine, and I would not fail. By the third day, the glittering illusion of Paris had begun to crumble. Michael and Sophie's 10-day fantasy, flights, hotel, fine dining, was unraveling, and I watched from hundreds of miles away, my hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea, heart pounding with a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Michael's calls had become more desperate, more erratic. His voice, once confident and charming, now trembled with panic. "Julia, the hotel, they're threatening legal action. They have our passports." I remained silent for a long moment, letting the words sink in. I could picture him pacing the lobby, Sophie's eyes wide with fear, both of them realizing that the world they had tried to escape into was now collapsing. I don't understand. You froze the card. Why? I didn't." "Suspicious activity," I said evenly, calm, almost detached. "I reported it. The company is investigating. Standard procedure." There was a pause. I imagined him slumping into a chair, finally confronted by the consequences he had long ignored. For days they scrambled. Emails flooded my inbox from Sophie, each one desperate, pleading, filled with excuses and half-truths. "Please, Julia, we can't pay the hotel. Michael promised me he had this covered. You have to help." I read them carefully, savoring the raw panic, the unraveling of the illusion they had built. My internal monologue churned with conflicting emotions, the rage of betrayal, the pride of regaining control, the subtle, creeping guilt that perhaps this was too harsh. But no, justice was not harsh. It was precise, and they had left me no choice. Michael tried manipulation, calling repeatedly, leaving frantic voicemails, each one laced with guilt and charm. I let none of it reach me. Each call, each message, only confirmed what I already knew. He had made his bed, and now he would lie in it. Meanwhile, I began cataloging everything: hotel receipts, flight confirmations, credit card statements, and the archive of flirty, incriminating emails between Michael and Sophie. Each piece of evidence strengthened my resolve. This was not about petty revenge. It was about truth, accountability, and reclaiming what was mine. On the 5th day, the reality of Paris hit them like a thunderclap. The hotel management refused further credit without immediate payment. Michael called in near hysteria. "Julia, but we can't leave. They won't let us. We don't have enough cash." I sat quietly, letting him stew. "Perhaps Sophie should have budgeted better," I said softly, letting the words sting. "Or maybe you should have been honest from the start." He sputtered, trying to argue, to rationalize, to charm. But there was nothing left for him to manipulate. Every excuse, every plea, fell flat against the evidence I held. Every lie had been cataloged, every secret revealed. I reflected on the irony. They had chosen adventure, risk, indulgence. And now, stranded in the heart of one of the world's most romantic cities, they were facing the harsh, unvarnished truth of their choices. By the 6th day, Sophie was pleading on Michael's behalf. Her voice panicked, through text messages from a borrowed phone. "Please, Julia, we'll do anything. We can work this out. We're desperate." I typed carefully. "When you return, consequences will be addressed. For now, your financial irresponsibility is your responsibility. I am not your emergency fund." I pressed send and leaned back, the weight of my emotions pressing down. Anger, yes. Hurt, definitely. But beneath it all, a grim satisfaction. I was no longer the one being manipulated, the one left vulnerable by deceit. I had reclaimed control. I had set the boundaries. And Michael and Sophie were feeling the full measure of what it meant to betray trust. Night fell, and I sat by the window, looking out over the quiet streets of my neighborhood. The wind rattled the glass, carrying with it a symbolic resonance. Storms, like betrayal, can be violent, unpredictable, but they also pass. And when they do, what remains is clarity, strength, and the lessons carved into your soul. As I prepared for sleep, I knew the final confrontation would come when Michael returned. There would be no theatrics, no pleading, just evidence, cold facts, and the undeniable proof that his actions had consequences beyond his control. I closed my eyes, letting the city's quiet seep into me. Paris might have been a playground for Michael and Sophie, a fantasy detached from reality. But reality had a way of asserting itself, and I would be ready to meet it head-on. Because betrayal had revealed more than infidelity. It had revealed character. And Michael's character had been exposed in stark, unflattering relief. And I was ready to claim the victory that was mine. Not through malice, not through cruelty, but through clarity, strategy, and an unwavering sense of justice. Michael returned home defeated, his posture slumped, a shadow of the man who had once walked confidently through our front door. Paris had stripped him bare, financially, emotionally, morally. Sophie was gone, vanished like a ghost, leaving him to face the consequences of their reckless escapade alone. I met him at the door, calm, measured. No tears, no shouting, no trembling pleas, just the weight of inevitability. "Where's Sophie?" I asked softly, almost disinterested. She left, went back home," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. I nodded. Expected, predicted. I had seen the patterns long before he did. Now it was time to settle accounts, not with anger, but with justice. Over the next several days, the legal and financial process unfolded with surgical precision. My attorney guided me through negotiations, house, assets, personal belongings. Michael's attempts to manipulate or charm his way into leniency were futile. Every lie, every flirty email, every misused credit card had been documented. Evidence was irrefutable. "I can't believe you're doing this," Michael whispered one evening, desperation coating his voice. You're ruining us." I stood, composed. "I'm not ruining anything, Michael. You already did. I'm just making sure the consequences reach their proper place." He faltered. I could see the realization dawn. Betrayal carries a cost far beyond guilt. It carries consequences, tangible and inescapable. The settlement was finalized swiftly. Michael received his personal belongings and his car, nothing else. I retained the house, the majority of our savings, and the stability that had been my birthright. Sophie, the catalyst of this chaos, was erased from our lives. No emails, no calls, no lingering threads to pull at the fabric of what I had rebuilt. The emotional aftermath was subtle, yet profound. Michael's face, once so familiar, now held a trace of defeat I could not have fabricated. Every interaction was strained, measured, a silent acknowledgement of the gulf that had grown between us. I allowed myself a private moment of reflection in the living room, the quiet now my sanctuary. The sun filtered through the windows, warm light illuminating the absence of chaos. I thought of the months of deception, the heartbreak, the anger, and yet I also felt relief, clarity, freedom. Paris had been a crucible, testing the limits of loyalty, trust, and character. Michael had failed spectacularly, and the consequences, financial loss, exposure of deceit, loss of trust, were deserved. Sophie's disappearance was poetic in its silence, a reminder that actions have ripple effects, and not all threads of indulgence survive scrutiny. Even as friends and family whispered, questioned, or condemned, I held firm. I had acted with precision, intelligence, and foresight. Yes, the financial maneuver, freezing the card, was deliberate, perhaps even audacious. But in the calculus of justice, it was the only choice that aligned with truth, protection, and accountability. Months later, life had resumed its rhythm. Michael was a memory of lessons learned too late. I was stronger, wiser, and infinitely more aware of the power of clarity, vigilance, and self-respect. Standing in the empty house, I locked the door behind me, turning the key slowly, deliberately. Behind that lock lay the past: betrayal, deceit, frustration, and anger. Ahead, the path was mine alone, unburdened by the mistakes of others. The storm had passed. Paris had taught him lessons, but it had also taught me something more profound. The quiet, calculated reclaiming of power is far more satisfying than any impulsive act of revenge. It is a statement, a reclamation, a declaration that no one can take from you what you are unwilling to lose. And with that knowledge, I stepped forward into the sunlight, ready to begin again.